She didn't notice I saw her. That's where it really began, with a moment she thought slipped under the radar. It was late afternoon, and I had just wrapped up a pretty decent run of interviews at the firm. I work as a background investigator for corporate hires. Basically, I dig through people's personal and financial trash to make sure companies aren't letting lunatics into the C-suite. Nothing glamorous, but it makes you sharp when it comes to details. So when I walked into the building across from the university to pick up our dry cleaning because, of course, she forgot, and saw her sitting on a bench near the art faculty entrance, wearing heels and a dress I hadn't seen since our anniversary 3 years ago, I froze. Not because she looked good, although she did. No, it was her body language. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the little tilt of her head, the nervous flick of her fingers along the hem of her dress. These weren't random. I've watched her for over a decade. That was her. I hope he likes me mode. She wasn't waiting for me. I ducked back behind the corner, across the street, behind a tree. A minute passed. 2. Then he showed up. Tall guy, early 30s, I'd guess. Casual, unbothered, like he had every right to kiss my wife on the cheek like he'd been doing it every week. Maybe he had. She laughed and touched his chest lightly, just like she used to with me when we were still figuring each other out and couldn't keep our hands apart. I didn't confront her, not yet. I followed them. I had no plan, no grand scheme. I just needed to know. They went into the art gallery connected to the university. It wasn't anything fancy, more like a student showcase, but I couldn't help noticing the way she clung to him when he leaned in to explain something. She nodded like he was quoting poetry. The last time I tried to talk to her about one of my favorite books, she told me she didn't have time for fiction. But here she was, staring at paintings like each one held the secrets of the universe, like each brushstroke was whispering to her. I left before they came out. I didn't want to see how it ended. That night, I cooked like usual. Grilled chicken with sweet corn and the weird couscous thing she likes that tastes like cardboard but somehow makes her feel light. She walked in just before 7, holding a tote bag and fake yawning like she'd been grading papers all day. She taught history at a high school not far from here. Or at least, that's what I assumed she was still doing. Maybe now she was grading paintings and playing art critic on the side. "You're quiet," she said, setting her bag down and slipping off her shoes. "Long day?" Something like that. She kissed my cheek, a cold, businesslike peck, and headed straight for the bedroom to change. I sat at the table and watched the wall while she hummed to herself in the next room. When she came back in sweatpants and a tank top, she acted like nothing had changed. But something had. For me, everything had. For the next week, I didn't follow her. I didn't bring it up. I didn't accuse her or rage or whimper or ask stupid questions like, "Why him?" Instead, I started watching, really watching. When she got dressed in the morning, I noted the details, what bag she picked, if her makeup changed. I checked the laundry, not for perfume or lipstick, but for receipts, hidden things, anything out of the ordinary. I wasn't obsessing. I was documenting. One evening, she had a staff dinner. "Department head's birthday," she said, waving it off. "Not optional." I nodded and smiled and went about my evening like a man with nothing on his mind. After she left, I made myself a drink and pulled out the small recorder I had slipped into the lining of her tote bag. It wasn't a wiretap. It was just a tiny digital mic with enough juice to catch a conversation in a 10-foot radius. I figured I'd get some chatter, maybe some names. Instead, I got a whole scene. She wasn't at a dinner. She was at a pottery studio. "I can't believe you remembered the red clay," she said on the recording. "You actually listened to me." "Of course I did," the guy's voice replied. "That's why I'm here." There was laughter, clinking of glasses, and later, the scraping of a stool, her voice close to the mic. "You know, if I didn't have a whole life built on lies, I'd be with you already." "I don't care about the lies," he said. "I care about now." I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I kissed her on the forehead and made coffee like it was any other Wednesday. Inside, I was burning, but I didn't let it show. That's the thing about pain. It either makes you fall apart or sharpens you into something dangerous. By Friday, I had a new plan. No phones. No texts. No cliches. Just me, her, and an invitation. I told her we were invited to a small exhibit downtown, part of a corporate networking event hosted by one of my former clients, a defense tech firm trying to appear art-friendly. She groaned but agreed. When we arrived, I guided her to the second floor, where a new collection of portraits had been arranged just for the night. Students from the university had submitted anonymous paintings of people who impacted their lives. She didn't recognize any names, but she recognized the face. Dead center on the white wall was a massive canvas. Her face, not smiling, just looking out into the room with an expression I couldn't quite define, guilt, longing, maybe both. Below the painting was a small card that read, "The woman I thought would be mine, but she belonged to someone else. She lied to me, and I let her. LM." She froze. For a second, I thought she might faint. Her hands trembled as she backed away, bumping into a couple admiring another piece. "Ray," she whispered. "What is this?" "Your friend's a talented guy," I said calmly. "Didn't know he could paint." "You knew." "For a while now." She looked around the room, panic rising, like everyone was suddenly staring at her, like the whole room was whispering. Maybe they were. I wouldn't blame them. "You set this up?" "I didn't paint it, but I did know it would be here. And I thought it'd be a good time to let you see how your lover sees you." She didn't speak, just stared. Her mouth opened once like she wanted to say something, then closed. I didn't stick around. I left her there in the middle of that gallery, under her own painted portrait, surrounded by strangers, drowning in the realization that everything she thought was hidden was now hanging on a wall. I didn't go home that night. I didn't even tell her where I went. I knew she would probably try to call, maybe text, maybe even come looking if her guilt pushed her that far. But I didn't feel like explaining anything. I needed a place where I wouldn't have to talk, where I could sit in silence without someone trying to hand me advice or sympathy. So I went to an old friend's mechanic shop where they still kept a small couch in the break room that hadn't been cleaned properly in years. I laid down on it, stared at the cracked ceiling tiles, and thought about how much effort it must take to lie to someone every day. The way she made breakfast, packed her tote, answered casually when I asked how her day had been, all of it rehearsed. And I never saw it. I, who spend every week digging up people's hidden truths for a paycheck, got taken in by the one person I thought I knew. When I finally returned the next morning, she was sitting on the porch, makeup still on from the night before but smeared just enough to show she'd cried. I walked past her without stopping, pushed the door open, and she followed me inside like a dog waiting for a command. "Ray, please," she started, her voice already breaking before she got past the second word. "I know you're angry, but—" "I'm not angry," I said, dropping my keys into the bowl by the door. "I'm just disappointed that you couldn't even respect me enough to hide it better." She blinked like she hadn't expected that. Maybe she thought I'd yell, maybe throw something, maybe storm out again, but what she didn't understand was I'd already done all that in my head. 100 times. I already saw myself flipping the table, tearing the paintings off the wall, screaming into her face until I couldn't breathe. But it wasn't worth it. She wasn't worth that energy. "I was going to tell you," she said. "No, you weren't." "I was. You were hoping it would fade, that he'd get bored, or I'd be too stupid to notice. You weren't going to tell me anything until it either blew up or slipped away quietly." "That's not true. You spent months sneaking around. You kissed him in public. You let him paint you like you were some sort of secret goddess. You let him capture your face, your body, your everything. And then you hung that painting on a wall where strangers would walk by and wonder who you were and who he was to you. But yeah, sure, you were just about to tell me. I made a mistake." I laughed. A short, hard laugh. "A mistake is forgetting to lock the door or putting salt in your coffee. What you did was deliberate, repeated, consistent. That's not a mistake. That's a pattern." She looked like she wanted to argue, but she knew better. For once, she had nothing. She stood there, arms crossed, not in defiance, but to keep herself from falling apart. I didn't care. "How long?" She hesitated. "Don't lie," I warned. "You owe me the truth, or whatever scraps of it you haven't already sold off." "For months." "Longer." She looked away. I took a deep breath. "Tell me when it started." "The first week of June. After that education conference. I saw him at a workshop, and we started talking. We went for a drink that night, and then it just kept going. You met him once and decided I wasn't enough anymore." "That's not what happened. It was different. He listened." "I listen. Not the same way." "Of course not," I said. "I listen like a husband." "He listens like a guy trying to get laid." Her mouth opened, closed again. She turned her back to me like she needed a second to collect herself, but I wasn't going to wait for her to feel stable again. I was done making her comfort my responsibility. "Was it just him?" "What?" "Answer the question." "No. Just him." "You sure?" "Because if I find out later that there was anyone else—" "There wasn't," she said quickly, then softer. "There wasn't." "And what about now? You done with him?" I told him I couldn't do it anymore. Before or after your face went up on a wall for everyone to see? She didn't answer that one. I grabbed my coat from the back of the chair. I'm staying at Lewis's place for a while. Can we talk about this? She asked. We just did. Ray, don't throw everything away. You already did. I'm just taking out the trash. I left before she could reply. There was nothing else to say. The house didn't feel like mine anymore. Everything inside it, from the coffee mugs to the sheets, felt like props in a lie I didn't agree to be part of. I didn't want to be near her, didn't want to hear her shower, smell her perfume, see her fake concern. I just needed to breathe in a place where I wasn't being betrayed every time I blinked. The first night away was rough. Lewis's guest room had a mattress that felt like it was stuffed with bricks, and the ceiling fan made this weird clicking noise every 10 seconds that kept tricking my brain into thinking someone was knocking on the door. I laid there staring at the cracks in the ceiling, counting the seconds between the clicks like it would stop time from moving forward. The whole place smelled like burnt coffee and leftover pizza. Not bad exactly, but different enough to make it clear this wasn't my space. Nothing about it felt right, but nothing about going back home did either. I hadn't cried. Not once. Maybe it hadn't hit me all the way yet. Or maybe I just didn't have anything left in me to break down. By the third day, she started calling again. First it was once in the morning and once at night. Then it was every few hours. I let them all ring out. I didn't block her. I wanted her to sit in the silence and know I was on the other end, choosing not to pick up. Lewis told me I should answer, just to get closure or whatever people think is helpful, but I wasn't interested in giving her peace. She could stew. That was part of the consequence. It was on the 5th night that she showed up at the shop. I was helping Lewis close up, moving a busted-out tailpipe from the lift area when I heard the bell above the door. I didn't look right away because I figured it was a customer who hadn't read the hours posted. When I finally turned, there she was, wearing a hoodie I hadn't seen before and jeans she hadn't worn since before the holidays. She looked like she hadn't slept much. Her hair was up in a messy bun, not the styled version she usually did, just a practical mess pulled back to keep her from going crazy. She held her arms like she was cold even though it was warm inside, and she didn't speak right away. Just looked at me like she'd forgotten what words were. Lewis stood up from the stool, wiped his hands, and gave me a look. You want me to give you 2 a minute? I didn't answer. I just stared at her until she finally found her voice. Please, Ray. Lewis nodded slowly and slipped out the back without another word. I leaned against the counter, arms folded, waiting. I didn't come to fight, she said. I just wanted to talk. You already said everything that mattered. Every lie. Every excuse. What's left? She took a shaky breath, stepped a little closer, but kept enough space between us like she knew not to push it. I haven't seen him since the gallery. I'm not keeping score. I want to fix this. There's nothing to fix. There has to be. You broke it. All of it. You don't get to walk back in like this is a cable bill we forgot to pay. I know. I know that. But I can't just sit in that house and pretend like I'm okay without you. You did that just fine when he was around. That's not fair. Neither is cheating on your husband and calling it a mistake. She looked like she wanted to yell, but she swallowed it. She lowered her head and rubbed her forehead with the sleeve of her hoodie. I was wrong. Every step of it. I lost track of what we had, of what mattered. I got caught up in someone paying attention to me in a way that felt different, and I didn't think about the damage until it was too late. I shook my head. You had all the time in the world to stop. Before the first kiss. Before the first message. Before he put a brush to a canvas. You chose it. Over and over. I did. We stood there in silence for a while. The lights buzzed quietly above us, and I could hear the air from the old vent humming in the background. I'm not asking for everything to go back to normal, she said finally. I just want to know if there's a chance. Any chance at all. Do you even understand what it feels like? To have the person you built your whole life with handed off to someone else like it was nothing. I do now. No, you don't. You feel bad. You feel guilty. That's not the same. You don't have the replay in your head. You don't see it every time you try to close your eyes. You don't wonder if every compliment, or every dinner, or every smile was just you covering up what you were really doing. She didn't respond. She knew I was right. I don't hate you. I added. But I don't trust you. And I don't think I want it anymore. Tears welled up in her eyes. She wiped them away quickly, like she didn't want to give me the satisfaction of seeing her cry. I'll go, she whispered. I just wanted to say it out loud. I nodded, and she walked out. I didn't follow her. I didn't watch her leave. When Lewis came back in, he didn't say a word, just handed me a beer from the fridge and sat beside me. 2 weeks after she showed up at the shop, I filed for separation. It wasn't a divorce yet, but it was the first legal move, and I made sure she got served at work. I chose that on purpose. I didn't want her sitting at home with time to prepare, dressed in comfortable clothes, pretending this was just another speed bump. I wanted her to be in the middle of her neat little organized classroom, her face turning white while a stranger handed her an envelope that told her the life she broke wasn't something she got to hold onto anymore. The delivery guy told me she just stood there staring at the papers while the other teachers looked on. She didn't cry, didn't scream. She just folded the envelope and walked out of the room. That told me she finally understood I wasn't bluffing. I didn't stop there. A week after the papers were served, I sent a copy of the gallery photo to the school's board. Not out of spite. Although I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel satisfying, but because I knew she'd used the school printer and their after-hours keycard access to help that guy set up parts of the gallery. I knew because I checked the digital logs while she slept months ago. I still had access to some of the school's internal systems from a previous security audit they paid me to run, and I remembered her bragging about how she had access after hours. That was enough for me to get the proof. I printed the logs, along with photos from the setup and copies of messages I had pulled from the gallery's event planner's website, messages she thought were private. She lost her job within the month. They offered her the option to resign quietly, which she took, because the alternative meant an investigation and possibly losing her teaching license. That part didn't bother me. Actions have consequences. She played with fire and thought her role in the community would keep her safe. It didn't. The next step was the apartment. She thought I didn't know about it. She thought I didn't know that she and her painter had leased a one-bedroom unit 3 blocks from campus under his name. But I'd followed the trail. Bank transfers to a new account. A mailbox key on her ring she thought I hadn't noticed. She paid the rent in cash, withdrawing odd amounts every other week to avoid suspicion. What she didn't know was I'd already talked to the landlord and offered him 6 months' rent in advance for all the unit records. He didn't care who lived there as long as he got paid. And just like that, I had a full history, visitor logs, complaints, maintenance requests. She'd been there at least twice a week, sometimes overnight, sometimes during work hours when she said she had meetings. That was enough. I sent the logs to the guy's workplace. He wasn't just some hobby artist. He worked for a city-funded arts program for underprivileged youth. Turns out they had a strict policy on personal relationships interfering with professional workspaces. They dropped him within days. No big speech, no warning. Just gone. And still, I didn't hear from her. Not until the end of the month. She showed up again, this time at the diner where I usually had breakfast on Saturdays. Lewis wasn't with me. I liked going alone to clear my head, just eggs and toast, and a newspaper that never had anything good in it. She sat down across from me without asking. "You've made your point," she said, her voice calm but low, like she was trying to sound in control. "Not sure what you mean. You got me fired, got him fired, destroyed everything." "I didn't destroy anything. I just made sure people saw what you built. I loved you." "No, you loved what I gave you. The stability, the safety, the fact that you could live 2 lives without worrying I'd look too closely. I messed up. You keep calling it a mistake like it was a single thing. It wasn't. You built a whole life behind mine. You're getting what you want. We're separating. What else do you want from me? Nothing. That's the point. You didn't even ask if I had anywhere to go. You didn't ask me that when you were sneaking off to someone else's place. I was weak. No, you were selfish. Weak people fall down. You went running." She looked at me like she wanted to say more, but she knew nothing she said would land right. "Not anymore. I want this to end," she said. "All of it. It already has." She left without finishing the coffee the waitress had just placed in front of her. I sat there for a while after she left, not because I felt better, but because I felt settled. Like everything that needed to happen had already passed, and now all that was left was the cleanup. It took me 3 weeks to agree to the last conversation. She asked for it through a single message. No follow-up, no guilt trip, no dramatic apology. Just a line saying she wanted one final talk, not to beg, not to change anything, but to clear what was left hanging. I read it a few times before I responded. The silence between us had grown comfortable. There was no screaming, no constant texts, no forced attempts at fixing something that had already fallen apart. But part of me knew I had to hear her out, not for her, but for me. I needed to put words to everything I had been dragging around since the day I saw her with him near that art building. So I told her to meet me at the park near the river, The one we used to visit every spring because she liked the walking paths and I liked the quiet. When I got there, she was already sitting on one of the benches. No makeup, no fancy coat, no earrings. Just jeans and a plain gray sweatshirt, hands stuffed in the front pocket, shoulders tense like she was bracing for something heavy. I didn't sit right away. I stood beside the bench, staring at the water for a while before finally lowering myself onto the far end. There was a full 2 feet of space between us. It felt necessary. "I'm not going to make excuses," she said without turning toward me. "I've said enough already." "Good. But I do want to tell you something I haven't said. If it's another reason for what you did, I don't want to hear it. It's not. I'm not here to explain away what happened. I just want to tell you that before everything started going wrong, I felt like I was losing you. You weren't distant, you weren't cruel, but it felt like we were both just stuck in a routine. Like we were more like 2 people managing a schedule than actually living together. That doesn't justify what I did. Nothing does. I just wanted you to know how it started in my head, not in reality." I let the words sit between us for a minute. I wasn't going to argue with her. I had felt that same distance, sure, but I had assumed it was just part of being married for years. That didn't give either of us a reason to go looking for something else. The right thing to do would have been to say it, to name the problem and work on it, not run off to someone else who barely knew her. "You know what really gets to me?" I asked. "It's not even that you cheated. That hurts, obviously. But it's more that you didn't think I'd find out. You thought you could keep both lives going without anything clashing. That makes it worse. Because it tells me you had enough trust in him to risk everything, but not enough in me to be honest." "I did think I could control it," she said, voice low. "I thought I could manage the feelings, keep it separate, convince myself it wasn't real. But then it became something I couldn't lie about anymore. You say that like it was out of your hands. It wasn't. I'm not saying that to dodge anything. I made the choices. I just didn't stop. And I hate myself for it." I shook my head. "You don't get to say you hate yourself. That doesn't fix anything. You don't get to make yourself the one who needs comfort now." "I know. I'm not asking for comfort." I turned to face her. "Then what are you asking for?" "Nothing. That's what I meant in the message. I'm not asking for anything. I don't want to get back together. I don't want forgiveness. I just want to tell you I understand now. What I destroyed wasn't just trust. It was a whole person who saw a future with me and believed I was someone who could be trusted with it. I broke that. You didn't deserve it." We sat in silence for a long time after that. The kind of silence that used to feel peaceful when we were still good, when we didn't have to talk to be close. Now it just felt like a pause before walking away. "I'm going to finish the paperwork," I said finally. "Make it official." I figured. "You'll keep the house." "I don't want it." "You sure?" "Yeah. I don't want to sleep in a place where everything around me is a reminder." She nodded slowly, eyes still fixed on the river. "I'm not going to fight you on anything," she said. "You can take whatever you want from the storage, the books, anything. I won't contest anything." I stood up. My legs felt heavier than when I sat down. "I'll have my lawyer send you the rest." "Okay." I looked at her one more time. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I just felt tired. "Take care," I said. "You too," she whispered. I walked away. She didn't turn to watch. I didn't look back. The final paperwork came through faster than I expected. It arrived in a plain envelope, the kind that looks like it's holding something unimportant until you open it and your entire life, or at least the version of it you had built, is officially labeled and filed away. I sat at the table in Lewis's kitchen staring at the signature lines for about an hour. I didn't cry. I didn't feel triumphant. It just felt like turning off a switch. Once I signed it, I drove to the notary, handed it over without a word, and when I got back in the car, I realized I had nowhere to be. No home waiting. No obligation pulling me in a direction. I just sat there with my keys in my hand, letting the silence stretch longer than it needed to. For the next few weeks, I buried myself in work. I took every client I could, even the annoying ones with complicated requests and unreasonable deadlines. Anything to avoid too much free time. I didn't check on her. I didn't ask Lewis if he'd heard anything. I didn't drive past the house or check her social media. Whatever she was doing now didn't matter. I'd done what I needed to do. She could live however she wanted. If she wanted to move on quickly, good. If she wanted to sit in it for a while, also fine. Either way, I had no part in it. One night, I met up with a guy I hadn't seen in a couple years. Trevor. We'd worked a few jobs together back when I was just getting started in background investigations. He asked about everything, not in the nosy way people do when they want gossip, but in that quiet, careful way where they're offering a space to talk if you want it. I told him the basics. Cheated, exposed, separated. He just nodded. You still angry? He asked. No, I said. Just tired. That makes sense. Then we sat in silence for a bit, and for the first time in a while, it didn't feel uncomfortable. Later that week, I started looking at apartments. Nothing big. Just a place that didn't smell like car grease and day-old food. Lewis had been great, but I needed my own space. I found a small one-bedroom unit on the other side of town, nothing special but clean, quiet, and far enough from the past. I moved in with 2 bags, a box of books, and a folding chair. I ordered a mattress online and slept on the floor until it arrived. I didn't mind. The silence was different now. It wasn't empty. It was mine. One afternoon, I got a message from her. I hadn't heard from her since the park. It wasn't long, just a simple line. I got the final papers too. I hope you're okay. I stared at it for a while. I didn't reply. I didn't feel anything reading it. Not sadness, not anger, not even relief. Just an acknowledgement that a part of life had closed. A few days later, I saw her by accident at the grocery store. She was in a different aisle, holding a basket, looking at some canned goods. I ducked away before she saw me. I didn't want to talk, didn't want to pretend we could have a normal exchange. I left my cart and walked out. I didn't even remember what I had gone in for. I drove home in silence and sat on my balcony for the rest of the afternoon. Sometimes people want closure like it's a final scene, a conversation, a long letter where everything is explained and wrapped up. But closure isn't something you get from someone else. It's just something you decide to live with. Months passed. I got used to the space. I filled the apartment slowly, one piece of furniture at a time. I made friends with the guy across the hall, an older man who liked watching baseball and never asked personal questions. I started cooking again, badly at first, but enough to avoid ordering out every night. I got better at sitting with my own company. I stopped thinking about her every time I passed by a coffee shop or saw someone wearing that brand of shoes she used to like. One morning, I looked at myself in the mirror and saw someone I hadn't seen in years. Not the guy who got betrayed. Not the one who caught her. Just me. Someone who had gone through something hard and kept going. Someone who didn't need to forgive or forget to move forward. Just needed to keep walking. I didn't need to tell this story to anyone. But I'm telling it now because if you've ever sat in a room wondering how someone you loved could look you in the eye and still lie to your face, know that it's not the end of you. It doesn't have to define you. It hurts, yes. It takes something from you. But what you build after that is yours alone. It doesn't have to be beautiful or perfect. It just has to be yours. And mine finally is.